Today's LinkedIn Live. Today I'm going to be talking about OKRs. It's an OKR webinar, and this is basically an introduction to OKRs. So feel free, if you're interested, feel free to drop a message into the comments on YouTube or on LinkedIn. I'm always keen to hear from you. And I should, if everything goes well, doesn't always, but if everything goes well, I should see this working now. You can hear me. That's good. What I might even do, I'm just going to put my headphones on, because then when I have my headphones on, I tend to slow down my talking. So I'm going to have my headphones on while I do this. And I'm also just going to change this microphone like that, because then you won't hear my typing or tapping away in the background or anything else that's going on. It's a bit better sound. Okay, so we're going to get into OKRs and what happened, how to use OKRs in this webinar. As I say, the purpose of this is basically going to be an introduction to OKRs. Why have OKRs? What OKRs are? How to use them, and what to do to get started. And I'm going to give you a tip to get started really simply. We're also, during this process, we're going to go through some of the things that, some of the common misconceptions. I find that in my work with, I work mostly with scale-up companies and executive teams, but I work quite a lot with managers of different types as well. But in my work, I often come across people who have read the book. They've they've read one of the OKR books, or they've done OKRs at some other company somewhere else. Maybe they've learned from Google or asked a friend or something like that. Maybe they've watched some videos, they've seen some training. And what I found is that many people end up in a situation where they have some misconceptions about what OKRs really need. And this tends to drive turn OKRs into something of a cargo cult and something of a process-heavy situation where you're not really getting the results you want, and you feel like you're doing all of the things that you think you should be doing, but you're not getting the results that you want. So I'm going to talk about how to do OKRs in a way that works for small companies and small growing companies in particular. It also works for larger companies. The trick here is really to make it work for you. So once you understand the basics of how OKRs should work and why they're working like this, you can then adapt them into how they work for you and your company. So without further ado, I'm just going to go into my presentation here. There's a picture of me just because I sometimes like to remember what I look like. What we're going to do, as I say, talk about why OKRs, what are OKRs, how to use OKRs, getting started. Then I'm going to talk about the Scale Up Leaders Operating System, which is a new course that I'm planning to put out. It's a video-based course with some live training that I plan to put out in March. And I'm very keen, if you're interested in this, very keen to hear from you. And as part of that, I'm going to give you a preview of the 4 critical rhythms that every leader needs to drive in their organization. So let's get started. When they're talking about OKRs, what I'm really talking about is leadership. It's a mechanism for leadership. And leadership, the best understanding I've seen of leadership is from Kevin Cruz. And this is, leadership is a process of social influence which maximizes the efforts of others toward the achievement of a goal. And so this is where I think OKRs come in. Some people use OKRs as some sort of performance management system, as some sort of metrics type, let's track everybody system. And I don't think that's that useful, to be honest. I think the useful part here is really about focusing on, how do I, as a leader in my organization, and a leader, by the way, doesn't have to be a manager. You can be a individual contributor leader, like a product manager or a project manager or something like that, or a technical lead, or you can be a manager of a function or a business unit, or just a leader in the organization, or an executive or a CEO, right? But there's a process of social influence which maximizes the efforts of others toward the achievement of a goal. And the wonderful thing about OKRs is that they have a little discipline, a little process around them to get you to make sure you're expressing the goal. And then upon that, you can build all this social influence. And the social influence really comes down to, because you're in a company, or because we're in a modern company, we're not really in these command and control situation. It doesn't work as well in our world. You need to have a social influence process. You're influencing without authority, even when you're the boss. And when you're doing this, you'll get the better results. And by better results, we're really maximizing the efforts of others. So I want to start out by talking about my introduction to OKRs. And what happened to me, I was at Google for 6 years. In fact, I might move myself down here. Let's over here. Let's try. I'm not sure where best I should have myself. But look, my introduction to OKRs, I joined Google in 2006 as a technical account manager, and eventually I became I became a manager at various parts, and I became a sales engineer. I did various other things, worked in a little bit of other topics at Google and different products. Um, but my first job was working on AdSense, and that's basically putting ads on websites like this one here. So this is example is actually one of my partners that I had, and it was a oops, moving that around, it's falling off the screen. It's trying to not to do that anymore. Um, so basically, the idea is to put ads on a newspaper website such as the Telegraph, and what we had to do is make the ads match the text. So in this case here, this is some article about Formula One, Max Verstappen, and the ads are completely wrong because they're all about telemarketing and marketing and things like that. So what I had to do is make sure that the ads, well, no matter what was in the context here, that the ads would be relevant to that and they weren't offensive. Such as we had a situation where you have a news article, and at the time, one that came up was Saddam Hussein died by hanging, and all the ads were for "Do you have neck pain?" And it's just not doesn't right. It's not right for the neck pain people. It's not right for the publisher, and it's not right for the user. So we had to fix that and maximize the revenue for these people. So that's what the job was. And what I was doing here, when I joined it, I learned all about the systems, the databases, the tools, the charts, all of that sort of data that we had to manipulate these ads and to improve them. I learned all about Google's business model, which is really about having happy advertisers, makes more publisher revenue growth, makes a better and a better positive user experience because publishers have revenue and they invest in user experience, and that generates more happy advertisers, and that's a nice sort of flywheel that drives the Google revenue engine. And so I learned all about that, but then I learned really specifically in our world, what are we doing? We're all about more ad slots, makes more page views, better ad slots, makes higher ad value, better placement makes higher click-through rates, and so on. All these sorts of rules about how to improve revenue and how to make publishers revenue growth while also improving the positive user experience and making our advertisers happy. So we're working on all these different things. Now, underlying this was an OKR, and this OKR basically, in fact, what I'll do is I'll go back here because while I was doing this, I learned what the thing that I found was really interesting when I first joined was that everyone I was talking to sort of had the same way of talking about these things and was focused on the same type of topics. We had a tech team, a business team, legal team, our product team, our engineering team. We were all focused on the same kinds of things, and the reason for this was because we had an OKR. And in fact, when they first introduced OKRs to me, I wasn't particularly impressed. It was just yeah, you've got OKRs. It's a structured goal system. That's great. But as I grew through this, I experienced what the how the OKRs actually help us. Maybe I'll make myself smaller. That might be better. How the OKRs really help us to focus. And what happened here is that we had this OKR, something like help our partners make more money for ads, increase the ad slots, increase the page views from this to this, and all this sort of stuff, right? And this caused, because of the way this was used in our teams and in other teams, this caused us to all be focused on the same sorts of things. So we were then able to achieve results. We knew what we were trying to do. We could use our initiative. We knew why this was relevant. We're not just increasing the number of ad slots. We're doing this in order to help our partners make more money from our ads, right? And that helps make a better user experience. So we had a good understanding and good engagement in what we were doing. Now, our managers didn't just set that and then say, go for it. I'm going to have to change these slides so that I appear in a consistent place on the slides. It's a bit difficult. Our managers didn't just sort of set this OKR and say, go. We used to have a weekly check-in, and we'd be reviewing our progress, plans, and problems. Like, what are we doing next? What have we done? What are we doing next? And what problems we had? What learnings we had? Are we on track to get to the result that we want to get to? How does the activity that we're planning to do actually help us, or the one that we are doing help us? And this, is there a better way? How do we know? And should we change anything? All of this kind of questions and these kinds of discussions would happen, structured specifically around the OKR that we had and around the work that we were doing. And so this meant that we were engaged in actually improving the real work that we wanted to do and actually doing this work. So that was great. And what I found from this is that by doing this, we were empowered and engaged. So as a team, we were sort of able to take initiatives in order to get that, and we're engaged in delivering the actual result we needed to do. So if you go back to what I was doing in terms of like manipulating those ads or improving the ads on the website, one of my colleagues decided that, this process, we have to go into the source code and have a look at JavaScript and unpick HTML, and it's all quite a manual and slow process. So he developed a tool that sat in, it wasn't Firefox, it wasn't Chrome at the time, it was Firefox. He developed this plugin called the Publisher Toolbar. And it's now actually a product that Google gives to publishers to help them do it. But basically, this would enable anyone who is using this toolbar to instantly look at a website and see where the ads came from and what's driving these ads and how are they being created. So that made everything smoother and made us much more efficient. It made our life better. But nobody told him to do this. He just said, you know what, this process is a bit annoying. I know what I'm trying to achieve. Let's just automate this part. Let's make the tool that makes this work. And there's so many examples where this happened in my team or the teams that I was working with at Google, largely because we all knew what we were really trying to achieve and we were empowered to do so. And that becomes, again, because of the OKRs, but also because of the management style. And so what's really going on here is that this engagement, we were engaged in creating in delivering the results that we had, and that helps create the results. There's plenty of studies that tell you that engaged people, engaged employees, help create great results. And if you don't have engaged employees, you have poorer results. And in Google's case, it's known for those 10x results. Like we're all focused on creating great results. Now, a lot of this is not just because of the OKR. It's not like we set an OKR and magic happens. It's because of the way we structure management around this. And so if you think about what the OKR is, it's an objective and the key results here. So this is what an OKR looks like. I use this little diagram here to just get a visual representation of an OKR, the objective and the key results. But that's not the magic. The magic is that our managers were leading us in a really good way. Like they were using this in order to keep focus, in order to engage us in the real work that we're trying to do in creating value for our publishers, our advertisers, and our users. And they're empowering us, and they're using this as a discipline to help them empower us as people in the team. And of course, because we all knew what we were trying to do, working with other teams was relatively speaking easy. You could work with them and discover what's your objectives, what's your key results, what are you trying to achieve, and now you'd know whether we're actually aligned and whether we can collaborate and how we can collaborate. It's really, really helpful. As a contrast, I want to talk about South Park. Because the reason I'm talking about South Park is because this particular episode is from about 20 years ago, it's a parody of the dot-com business boom back in 1999 or whatever it was, and basically this sort of shows how a lot of management works and how a lot of goal setting works in practice. So the story here is that there's 4 boys in this in South Park. All their underpants kept going missing, and so they stayed up late one night and they saw these gnomes stealing their underpants. What's going on? So they chased the gnomes and followed them through this underground caves to their massive cave, which had a huge pile of underpants and all these gnomes running around doing things. I said, what are you doing? And they said, well, collecting underpants is our business. So what do you mean collecting underpants is your business? Well, collecting underpants is just phase 1. What's phase 2? Oh, I don't know. No one knew what phase 2 was. But phase 3 was profit, and they were very clear on what phase 1 and phase 3 were. Now, what happens in many organizations is we're very clear on what phase 1 is. We know what our collecting underpants are. We know what activities we're trying to do, the tasks that we're trying to get done. And often people will set goals around those specific tasks, and they will manage specifically around that, and that's all they do. We're also reasonably clear on what profit we want to generate. That's often clear enough. But the problem is that it's this phase 2, this middle part, that connects the activities to the profit. That's the part that's missing in most organizations, most management, most goal setting systems. And hence, you think about what happens here to the gnome experience, or rather the employee experience. As an employee, when someone's managing my activities and I don't know quite how that links to profit or links to the value I'm creating for customers, I don't know what I'm doing here. It's hard to have initiative. It's hard to sort of be creative. It's hard to own this solution. It's hard to be motivated by it, right? On the other hand, if I'm told to make more profit, there's so much scope here. Potentially, I can do anything, but can I? Because I keep having ideas, but then I keep running up against other people who push me in a different direction. What I need is this clarity around what are we really trying to do here, and where's the domain that I can solve problems in, and that's part of creating engagement. And that, of course, creates business results, right? That engagement creates the results. So think about the underpants gnome situation. They're not going to be creating great results because they really don't know what they're really trying to do here. What's the real goal? So we talked quite a lot about the background here, like my story. I'm going to talk briefly about why OKRs. And this is kind of just a bit of Well, it's what are we really trying to do with OKRs here? So what we're really doing here is turning vision into action. We're executing the strategy. You've got a long-term vision and strategy, and you want to link it back to the daily plan of action. What happens in most organizations is the long-term vision and strategy isn't often very clear. But even when it is, it's very hard to link that to my quarter. Like, what am I doing today, this week, right? And what's going on here is when you add quarterly key objectives and key results, that helps you clarify what it is that we need to do this quarter as a team. We're all working on something similar here, as a group, as a team, as a company. It clarifies what to do in order to deliver our long-term vision and strategy. That long-term vision and strategy, if it's clear enough, is great, but there's quite a lot of different paths you can do to get there, quite a lot of things we could be doing right now. So what do we do now? We're clarifying that with our quarterly key results. Now, on the daily basis, as teams, we're sort of working to sort of figure out what to do every day, but at least we know what we're trying to do in the scope of the quarter. The other thing that OKRs are doing here, and you may have been familiar with the Eisenhower matrix, is we have all these things that are important and not important, and urgent and not urgent. And what tends to happen is we spend a lot of time on the urgent and not important things, and on the urgent and important things. We're often distracted by the not urgent, not important things. But the not urgent and important things are the things that are very hard to create focus on. So what we do is with OKRs, we're trying to sort of drive attention to this, right? And that's really where the OKRs are. And that's where you're driving attention with these OKRs, and then using the OKRs to create your daily plan of action, create your project plan. You might be using some sort of agile Scrum process. You might be using Kanban. You might be using a waterfall method, whatever you're using, just to-do lists, right? Whatever it is. But if you know what you're trying to achieve, that keeps this discipline of looking at that OKR on a regular basis can help you focus on what we're actually trying to achieve here in this not urgent category. What's really interesting, by the way, is that when you focus on this not urgent category, often enough, that will then address a lot of the urgent and important stuff, right? Because you're usually addressing the sources of those problems, and then it reduces the amount of firefighting you have, which then enables you to move attention from the urgent and important stuff, the firefighting, back to the not urgent and important stuff, which is really implementing your strategy. With OKRs, what we're trying to sort of push OKRs into our organization to have this structure the conversations and build a results-oriented culture, because culture is really about how decisions are made. And what we're trying to do is make sure that when we're having conversations about work, we're linking them to the objective we're trying to achieve and the key results we're trying to deliver to meet that objective, right? So what's happening here is we all of these conversations. If you ever get stuck on a topic, like you're stuck in some problem, one of the things that happens is someone often will say, "Hang on a minute, what are we trying to really achieve here?" And if you're using OKRs well, the answer to that is, well, it's the OKR. So we know what it is. What this means is that you can have conversations not just about OKRs, but about the business itself, right? You shouldn't be just discussing OKRs. You should be discussing the business, but OKRs should come up in that discussion, and that helps you drive a results-oriented culture, which itself is how you deliver results. And of course, creating engagement. Managers are responsible for about 70% of employee engagement. The biggest impact on employee engagement is management. It's how you manage it, what's going on here. And if you have clear objectives and key results, and your objective says, what are we trying to do? And key results define the problem. Now, when you define the problem well enough in the right scope for the team, and in my detailed training, we go into this in detail, then that causes people to be engaged in this, because now I know what I'm trying to achieve, and it's usually related to customers, and how we're measuring the results and what problem I'm really trying to solve here. And it creates clarity. It creates the ability to be engaged in this. If you have a comment or anything, feel free to drop the comment in in LinkedIn or in YouTube or wherever you like. I've just seen one there from Natalia. She says, "Great explanation. Thanks very much." I don't know whether I'm going to put that up there. Can I add up? No, I can't put it on. Oh, there we go. She appears on screen. Great explanation. Thank you, Natalia. Appreciate it. So that's what we're trying to create this engagement, and using OKRs, we can create engagement. Now, who uses OKRs? I wanted to just briefly cover this because it does come up quite a lot. Big tech, it started at Google and Intel, really. Amazon uses them in parts. I worked for Amazon and I worked for Google. I used them at Google. I didn't use them at Amazon, but different parts of Amazon, I do use them. Apple, I'm told, uses them. Microsoft uses them. Facebook uses them. All the big companies use them. Many unicorns and growth companies use them. I've actually worked with a couple of these to help them implement OKRs, and some of them I have not. But a lot of these growth companies and unicorns and soon to be unicorns, most of my customers are on that edge of becoming unicorns. They're in their hundreds of millions valuation. are often using OKRs, and many transformers, companies that are transforming, use OKRs. And I've worked with a couple of these as well. But realistically, it's it's lots of different companies. And my recommendation is, especially when you get to about 30 to 50 people, that's about when your existing management structures start to break down. And it's really good to start to introduce something slightly formalized. I find that in the earlier stages, the search stages, seed, 10 people, 15 people, they're not as necessary. I use them for myself a little bit. But where the value really comes is when you start to have too many people to be able to have communication with everybody all at once. Now, people also ask me who uses OKRs, like really who are the people, right? And what I would say is it's not just managers. In fact, I suggest that not every manager should be using OKRs, or at least they shouldn't be setting OKRs. Um, so don't have your OKRs mapped to your org chart, right? OKRs are really about leadership. And so what that means is that some managers should not be setting their own OKRs. They should just be working on delivering the OKRs that are set in other parts of the company, maybe in the executive level, at the company-wide level, maybe in their business unit, maybe on the product. Some people who do not have formal reports should be setting OKRs, especially product managers, because this is a tool for creating momentum in an organization and creating direction and creating focus. And as a product manager, that's really your job, right? So it's a really great tool for creating that focus. If you're an engineering team, for example, you might not even have your own OKRs, but you'll be working primarily on the product team, the product OKRs. So in that sense, it's kind of shared between the two. But as an engineering team, you're probably contributing to those a lot, but you don't want to have separate OKRs to your product team, because then you're just confusing everything and you have too many sets of objectives, and now we're confused about what are we trying to do here. So what are OKRs? Let's go into a bit more detail about what they are. I see them as a communication tool. This is really about, we use them on our presentations. This is what you're trying to achieve, getting people focused on that. We put them in our meeting agendas. Like the agenda might well be, how are we going on this objective or that objective or these key results. We put them into an email to send to everyone, make sure that everyone knows about them. We put them on posters, right? Well, there are Q1 company OKRs, get the attention on them. If we're doing a launch announcement in our internal newsletter, we would say, here's the launch, here's what we did, here's some graphs and charts and things, and here's how it impacts the objective and the key results that we're trying to deliver. That's why we are doing this work. And that causes people to sort of recognize the link between their work and the results you're delivering for the company. So this is really helpful, but you can put this into every part of your organization, right? Whenever we're talking about work to be done and what we're trying to achieve, one of the things that should be coming up in this conversation is the OKR. What are we really trying to achieve here? How do we define success? What are we constrained by? What are we aiming for, right? What does success really look like? Is something that should come up whenever we're doing work. So OKRs should come up in work conversations. One of my rules of thumb is that if OKRs are like a separate topic, so we only talk about OKRs when we have an OKR meeting, and otherwise we're doing our real work, then clearly it's either your real work is not the right work, or your OKRs are not the right OKRs, right? So OKRs should be coming up in your work conversations. There is a goal format with OKRs. It's a way of setting goals. Like I was just talking to someone the other day about what OKRs are, what the difference between OKRs and goals. And I just say OKRs are a specific kind of goal that fits into a quarter-based system, right? You might also have business goals over longer term. You might have short-term goals for a project, whatever else. But OKRs are a kind of goal with a particular format. There's an objective and the key results. The format isn't actually that important, but it's really useful the way it works. So one of the things that I've noticed about a lot of OKR training and people who know something about OKRs when they join is that they get obsessed with the format and what it looks like, and they get specifically obsessed with how to write the perfect key result. I recommend not doing that. Here's how to think about this. The objective is all about setting direction and inspiring action. So it's all about making it matter to people. This is what we're trying to achieve, right? We're trying to do it. It defines the thing that you're trying to achieve here, right? So you're trying to make the world's best search engine. You're trying to build a sales machine. We want to, there's plenty of examples we could have here, right? We want to make it really easy for our customers to do business with us, right? That's a good objective. Now, some of these things you might want to make them more specific and more about something that's really conjures up the imagination, gets people engaged in what you're trying to do. But basically, this comes down to, it doesn't need to have a number in it. It's just about the kind of thing that you would say when someone says to you in the lift, what are you trying to do this year? You want to go, well, this is objective 1, 2, and 3, or these are our objectives. You don't have to have 3, you can have 1, one's great, but this is our objective, and that's the kind of sentence you want to have. And you want to have it so it's easy to bring it up in a sentence, in a conversation. And objectives basically, think about this, they're your key messages for this quarter. So what are you trying to do this quarter? These are our objectives, or this is our objective this quarter, right? That should be the kind of instant response. The key results, the blue part here in the bottom here, usually I recommend having somewhere between 2 and 5 of them. Fewer is better, but I mean, a 5 is fine. If you have 6 or 7, it's just a bit confusing. And this is all about clarifying, measuring, and empowering people. And what we're doing is clarifying the objective. We're clarifying, what do we mean by that? We mean this type of success. Here's how we're going to measure the success. But it also is how we're empowering people, because what we're doing here is we're setting the problem that we want you to solve. And within this, there's a lot of freedom. We're not sort of completely free. No one's going to talk to us. You do anything you want. But there's quite a lot of scope. Depending on how you set the key results, you're setting the scope. And what you're doing here is defining success, not tasks. So we're not saying, here's a list of the things you need to do. We're saying, here's what success looks like. Now, let's figure out what the tasks are to do. Now you're engaged in figuring out your own tasks. You're self-managing. It's very empowering for people, right? So key results are how you measure success in meeting the objectives. But from the other perspective, key results are how you define problems, right? So we're defining the problems to solve. And but you think about delegation. Delegation is all about making it really clear what problem we want people to be working on solving and what success looks like, so we know how to measure it. And this enables people to be empowered to do something useful while also being focused on the actual strategy. It's really good. Now, I've got 5 OKRs here, and what I've colored them specially because I think what happens here is that when you have one OKR, it creates great focus, right? It's really helpful. Most organizations struggle to define one, so 2, 3 is fine. When you get to 4 and 5 OKRs, it's just too many. It causes people to be confused because now everything's a priority, right? We're covering everything here. What I recommend you doing with OKRs is don't try and be messy, don't try and be mutually exclusive, completely exhaustive, right? You don't want to cover everything. Just what's the most important things? What's the thing that really matters this quarter? If you can say one thing, that is ideal. If you have to say 2 or 3, fine. Once you get to 4, you can do it, right? But you should expect that what happens here is that people start to be confused about what's to do, and they start to be making their own trade-offs, and that's actually not quite what you want, especially when you have conflict between these things. And so I have seen organizations that have 16 OKRs, and invariably that causes problems because now people are confused. I see this from the employee's perspective. If you're an employee within an organization of 50 people or 200 people or whatever it is, there are multiple managers. Maybe there's a couple of sets of OKRs around the place. The more objectives there are and the more sets of OKRs, the harder it is to navigate what I'm supposed to do and how I link my work to the actual success of the company. So priorities create focus. That's what we're doing with the OKRs. We're using them as a tool to create focus and some discipline of like minimizing the number of them. One of the things that usually comes up, by the way, is how do I deal with business as usual? And my recommendation is to use KPIs for monitoring. So I'm doing operations. I've got sort of, in most businesses, most organizations, you have an operations team and you have a product and engineering team and you have various other teams, right? And some of the work that you do in every part is kind of like the same every day. It's the same kind of work. We're repetitive, or we're doing operating something. We may be in an engineering team, we keep maintaining uptime. Use KPIs for that. Just track the number and keep tracking it and respond to things when they go wrong. Maybe have progressive improvement there. That's great. You don't have to use OKRs for everything. Use OKRs for change. And especially in a product team or product changes, you're often wanting to create change. So most teams have some mix of these 2 types of work. In a product team, what you're wanting to do here is like, there's a metric and we want to create a change in direction, or I want to have a step change, or I want to start measuring something, right? These are changes. And so using OKRs to define the change, but then there's a whole lot of other things that are key performance indicators that are really important that you also want to track. And you will be triggering off work from those things. And as I say, in different parts of the organization, you might have 80% KPI work or operational work, 90%, 95%, and only 5% change in an operational team, right? In a product or engineering team, potentially you're much more on this change related side and very little on the operational side, especially if you're early stages in a product. By the way, a sales team generally has incentive plans and they have some sort of sales pipeline and they manage that. Don't try and duplicate that through OKRs. It's not necessary. You have a sales incentive program, that's great. Have them work on that. As long as that's working, fantastic. And sales incentives tend to be the way that sales organizations work, and that's great. You can it's a type of KPI, right? What you might do is give them an OKR for a change in a small part of that, like 5 to 10% of their work is working on changing their sales process to adopt a new methodology or to adopt a new product or whatever it is. Okay, so KPIs are basically how you manage your daily operations. You can do these both at the same time. You don't have to replace KPIs with OKRs and then try and cover everything with OKRs because that then just confuses the message. And of course, no matter what you're doing, you still can't do everything. Focus is all about saying no. So partially this is about saying no. We're only measuring the most important key performance indicators, hence the word key. It's not all of the metrics, it's the ones that are important. You might start doing some analysis on many of the input metrics and using your OKRs for change. You only want to have a certain number of changes at a time, right? So focus is really about saying no to things. And part of this is about being certain about what you want to say yes to. So using OKRs, we're going to talk about how to use OKRs now. And what I have to say is that the way you use OKRs is really where you get the magic from. A lot of people have this idea that as long as we spend so much time setting and crafting our perfect OKRs, our perfect key results, perfect objectives, and then they ask, how do our OKRs look? Are they right? And that's the kind of engagement that people often ask me for. But in practice, that's not the main thing. The main thing is, how are you using them? How does this work with people? Some people also have this idea that, and especially if you look at OKR software sort of mentality, like we're going to get an OKR tool, this mentality that if we set our OKRs, we set them right, and then we put them into a software program, we can automate a lot of our management. And that's not really what it's about. Automating management doesn't work. It's not impossible. It's a human process, human process. You can automate some parts of the data and some parts of the causing conversations and prompting conversations, but mostly this is about human conversations between managers and people and their teammates and their stakeholders and their counterparts and collaborators, right? It's all about driving those conversations. So when you're using OKRs, that's what this is all about, right? We talked about having them in the communications, embedding them in there. They should be there. If they're coming up regularly, this is a good sign. But how do you actually do it in practice? Make plans, right? You have an OKR, make a plan to deliver the OKR. Now, this is where a lot of people get confused because there's sometimes like, oh, but goodness me, we're agile. We don't like planning. And if someone who says that usually isn't really agile because a plan is the basis for change. That's how you know how to change. So if you want to be agile, make a plan and then you can change it. And that's what you're doing here. You make the plan and you use that as a guide for what to do, but you're constantly modifying or changing the plan with the goal of meeting that objective. So the objective stays static, the plan keeps changing, right? It's not a matter of writing down the plan of what we do and then we just go and execute that plan, right? We wanting to focus on how do we improve, always thinking about how do we improve this plan? How are we engaged? We own this plan. How do we improve it in order to meet the objective? So make the plan. I find with planning, I'm not a great planner. And two common planning problems that I see that I have is the cowboy and the perfectionist. And the cowboy is basically, what's the plan? And you make something up. And that's what I tend to do. I make something up, write it in an email or whatever it is, but I don't really have a plan that's written down somewhere. But what that means is that every week someone asks me what the plan is, and I make up something else. It's kind of agile, but I don't know what the change was. I just know where I am now and what I would like to do now. And I can get away with that because sometimes it's not too hard to come up with it, but it's not that useful. And it doesn't create engagement. And the other one is the perfectionist. And this is what happens when someone says, that's not good enough, write down the plan. And then I have a habit of writing a 17-page plan in great detail, and no one reads it because it's too long and complicated. And I don't. You look at it and it's just not useful. But a lot of people do this, like they think that the plan has to be something glorious. So my secrets for making a good plan here are make a straw man plan. Just make 1 page, 1 hour. Write down the things. I'll give you an outline. Then take a 360 review with the people, make it our plan. So it's not just your plan. Learn and iterate on the plan, like use that input to improve the plan because then it's our plan, right? And this, by the way, when I say, we'll talk about the review in a minute, and then keep iterating while you're using it. So you're not just, it's not just a static plan. You're just, every week you're changing the plan, and that's okay. That's the point. You always want to be making the best changes, right? And you always want to be agile and adapting to what's happening. So you think about this, the plan is not a blueprint. It's not something to follow. instructions. It's a living document, and it just records your decisions about the best way of approaching the problem given what you know now. That's what it's about. So when you write a plan, write down the actual plan, like what you'll do, in what order, for how long, and how much resources it's going to take, how many hours, how many people, how many weeks. Add up the resources that you've said you're going to take here. Is this even realistic? Do we think it's possible? And by the way, there's always errors here. Like, it's never possible to get this exactly right. It doesn't matter. Write it down. Write down something that's vaguely appropriate, but it seems to be right, and then review it with people, and you'll get a slightly improved answer. But also, you'll at least know where you stand. And then list out the biggest risks. And I've written YAML. You are not a lawyer. Don't write down all of the risks. Don't. It's not about covering your ass. It's about just making sure you're aware of, like, where are the problems going to occur, and what do I need to be able to detect these problems early. And then I suggest projecting out leading indicators or milestones. Like, what are the things that are going to help us to tell we're on track? Now, you're doing this not just after having written the OKR, but ideally you're writing this in conjunction with writing the OKR. So you've got a draft of your OKR, you write a draft plan. Is it realistic to achieve that? And then we can modify our OKR to make sure it's somewhat realistic, because we have a plan, right? And then this plan is not finalized. It's just something we keep iterating on, but at least we've got some thinking written down on paper about it. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of examples. We're not going to go into them in detail. I have another training that goes into them in more detail. But in these examples, the simplicity and imperfection of them are features, right? So I always say that because they're not very impressive, and that's the point. Here's two examples. You're not going to read them now, but the basic idea here is it's a one-pager, and it's for the onboarding team plan. We have a key result of this, and I've got a plan of, like, here are the top things we're doing. Here's the impact that I think they'll have, the cost. It says there's software team A commitment. I don't know whether you can read it, but it says software team A commitment about here, right? What I want to do is review this with the software team and make sure that they're committed to this and they think that week 15 is realistic, right? So all that sort of stuff comes in there, and I've listed out the resources. And when someone reads this, they want to say, don't forget to add in the software team A here, right? And that's okay that I missed it, right? The point here is that I'm getting a start on writing this down, and it's there. It's taken me an hour to write it down, and I've got a little projection of where I'm going to get to with this operating team. With a product team, I might have projections about what we think we can do and where's realistic and so on. There's all sorts of things I might be doing here, but the purpose of this is to write down what I need to do and how, in what order, and then I'm reviewing it. I'm reviewing it with people, and this is not like I spend a week on it. I spend an hour on it, and then I review this with people. And I've got this little diagram here. It looks like a robot, but it's not. It's an organizational chart. And you're in the middle there. You've got a manager. You've got some peers. You've got your team. Maybe you have some stakeholder teams and other people you work with to get this done. You want to do a review of this with those people. And the purpose of this is to improve the plan. I just like what's missing here. What are the big things? We don't need to polish it. Just what's missing. Ask for their input. Align dependencies. Make sure if you've said you want to work with a software team, make sure you've spoken to them and they've seen the plan and they know how it fits into the overall context and they know what to do. Make sure the resources are committed. Is the software team actually planning to do this, right? And identify any problems that are coming up from this plan. Now, when you're reviewing it, you have to resist executing it. You have to resist doing it. You're just reviewing it. Add a step to resolve problems you identify into the plan. Like, we don't have, even if you get to the point where it's like, we depend on software team to do this, software team said they're not going to do this. You don't have to make sure you resolve that. You can even just say, we don't have commitment from this team that they can do this. This is a risk. But that's our plan, and maybe we resolve this during the quarter, or maybe that's a risk that really comes to fruition. Now, the purpose of doing this review is not to perfect the plan. It's to improve the plan, but specifically it's all about creating engagement. And what you're doing here is you're getting other people to help you write the plan. And there's a saying, those who write the plan don't fight the plan. Rhymes very well. I kind of feel like it's almost like those who write the plan. If you engage those people in writing the plan, they own the plan as well. It's their plan too. And now when we're working on this together, we have engagement from people. We have support from the people we need. And that's really, really helpful because now it's not just my plan. It's now our plan. So you're using this. So that's the process of the plan. And this will come up quite a lot. This method of reviewing something and iterating and socializing. This comes up quite a lot in my training and my work. It's really, and the way that I work with companies and how I suggest they work, it's all about getting engagement from other people. And the purpose of this really, by the way, is that when you're in that meeting with your colleagues and your manager, it's not just your plan, it's their plan as well. They already know it. So when you raise a problem, they already have some context. They can help you and they feel part of this process. And now you have a brain's trust to help you solve the problems. And sometimes that brains trust involves the manager of engineering or some other dependency saying, hey, we're going to change our plan. This affects you because you have that in your plan, right? Because they know. Creates collaboration. Now, once you've got that plan, you want to use it in your weekly execution cycle. This is all about coaching teams to get the right actions and get the results. It's all about solving problems as well. Sometimes the team's solving the problem. Sometimes you as a leader are going and taking this and solving the problem for the team. But what this is about is discussing the plan and changing the plan, right? That's what we're doing here. We're modifying the plan. We're not literally just discussing it. We're saying, well, I'll show you what we're doing here. We have this check-in, review the progress. How did we go on delivering our plan? Like, are we doing any of these things? Have we had success? Have we had problems, right? What plans are we changing? What problems have come up? Are we on track? How does this activity help? Does this really help us meet that objective? Is this plan still good? Is there a better way? How do we know? Should we change anything? All those questions are coming up. You're coming up within your team and also with your peers, right? You're doing this sort of conversation about how do we keep modifying our plan to go forward. And this means that rather than having, what you don't want is to have, let's just talk about our OKR and then having to explain your plan every time. It's just like generating cowboy work. You also don't want to be tied to a perfectionist plan. You want to be using this plan as a method for generating change or for a basis for change. At the end of the week, you want to capture the problems and wins, right? Capture the progress and record progress, plans, and problems ready for the weekly review. Now, I suggest putting them in an email or some other thing because then you can put them into the weekly review at the start of the week. Collect the wins and learnings and battle stories for celebration. Maybe you want to have a retrospective as well to sort of focus on improving the process if this isn't working, if it's really slow or heavy, and if it's helpful to actually have that meta work. And then you want to wrap up with weekly recognition. Bring out the beer, the wine, orange juice, pizza, hummus, nuts, whatever it is. Celebrate the wins, share the learnings, tell the stories. End on a positive, ready to start next week. So you go through this cycle here. I should have a slide that sort of shows the cycle, but you have a weekly check-in at the start and then a review at the end, and then you celebrate. And this sort of cycle continues. And because it's a weekly cycle, it creates the momentum. And this is part of the execution cycle that I talk about in the Scale Up Leaders operating system at the end. Now, one of the other things that happens, and this is a big challenge for most organizations, is aligning across teams. And I alluded to this in the Google story at the start. But what you want to do is when you need to work with another team, let's talk about what objectives you're trying to do. What are you trying to achieve? What are we trying to achieve? How does our objectives relate to the company objectives? And that helps us to figure out how best to collaborate. Because now I know what you're trying to achieve. We're not going to be at cross purposes. If it turns out that you're trying to achieve something completely different to us, then I know that this collaboration isn't going to go so well, and I might have to escalate or figure out another solution. If it's aligned, or so maybe we negotiate on what your OKRs are next quarter, right? But if they're aligned, then we should have a good starting point for creating collaboration. And of course, you're using OKRs to say no. So this whole idea of having things that are not important and so on, getting focused on the not urgent and important things. When someone else comes to you with something that they want to do, one of the tools you're using is, well, this isn't in my OKRs, so we should say no to this. And that means that rather than just being pushed around by other voices, we have a structure for saying, well, this is what we're really trying to do. We're not trying to do that. So we're focusing on this one. And if we want to change this, we need to have a broader conversation with management about what are we trying to achieve and why, and should we change our OKRs? So that's basically how to use OKRs. Now, getting started with OKRs, this is going to be a bit brief, just because for timing reasons. But I think what I'm going to present here is a really basic, simple way of getting started. Now, these are the sets of the way to think about this is like you're going to write objectives, right? The way to think about it is, what's my strategy? How does this strategy apply to this quarter? And then here are my objectives, right? Now, if it turns out that you can't write down 1, 2, or 3 maximum objectives to implement your strategy this quarter, then you don't have a clear enough strategy, and you need to do some more thinking about your strategy. What are you really trying to achieve? What's really important? Narrow them down, make trade-offs, make decisions. This can be hard. This can be painful because the strategy always is. It's always about saying no to stuff that's pretty good. It's not about saying no to the bad ideas. It's about saying no to other good ideas that are not the right ones for your strategy. So this is hard. And what I found is that when most organizations struggle to set OKRs, objectives in particular, it's because they don't have a clear enough strategy. So go back to the strategy and figure that out. Sometimes, by the way, it helps to just go, strategy is not clear enough. Let's make some objectives based on what we know now. And during the quarter, we'll clarify our strategy, because there's no point stopping to have a big strategy session and hope that nothing happens in the weeks while you're doing this. You still have to continue, but start with your strategy and try and create your objectives from your strategy. Now, think about the actions what usually happens here is that people think about the actions. Now, if you can come up with like the metrics that matter to measure the objectives, great, that's even better. But if you can't, think about the actions that you need to do. Why would you have to do this? How would you know if you're successful, like your project? How did you define success in this project from non-success? How will our customers measure our success? What alternative actions could we do that would produce the same result, and how do we measure that result? Now we're starting to get to the results and define the results as key results. We're getting to metrics and milestones and things that matter for key results. On the other hand, you think about the profit. How are we going about creating this profit? And this profit, for some companies, it's the money. For some teams or groups, this might be things that lagging indicators like sales or revenue or a number of new customers, right? Whatever it is that's a lagging indicator. How are we doing this? What value is it created that we capture? What's the input for this output? And what differentiates our strategy from others? And that's how you can move from this profit to results. So this is usually the actions are like the collecting underpants, and the profit is like the profit in the underpants gnomes. How do you move to results? These are the questions to move you right down that path towards results, around narrowing the options down to align with strategy, and about empowering people to decide which actions are best. So you want to try and find that balance. Now, when you've done that, right, that is a key result. There's a verb: increase, decrease, or maintain this metric from this start point to that target. That's a really simple key result. Or create or deliver this milestone by this date. And the date is implicitly the end of the quarter. So that's a really simple way of getting started. There's a lot more to this. I have a full training on this, but I mean, there's a lot more to it, but don't overcomplicate it. Let's just get started and have some ideas have some clarity about what you're trying to achieve, what success looks like, and why you're doing this, and then start using it in practice. As you're using it through the quarter, you'll learn how better to set the key results next time. Finally, put them in the OKR format, right? Not the most important part of the world, but this is helpful because it helps you to structure your conversations and make sure you have objectives and you have key results, and we're talking about the right things with the team. Now, I've covered all of the stuff about OKRs that I wanted to cover in this webinar. If you have any questions, at the end, I'm going to have some time for questions. But right now, I just want to talk about what I'm planning to be offering. The Scale Up Leaders Operating System is a program that I've put together, or I'm putting together rather, that I think is going to be of interest to quite a lot of people. What I've found is that in most of my customers, I work with the executive team, but there's a lot of work that I have to do with the rest of the organization, especially managers and product leaders. And so, but at the same time, doing that individually doesn't always scale very well, and it's not very accessible to people. My fees for an executive team are not accessible for individuals and for individual managers. So this is a process that's going to put together quite a lot of the things that I do, and how to think about OKRs into a complete system that is really easy to use as a leader. And what this involves, and I'm planning to launch this in March 2023. If you're interested, there's my email address and my LinkedIn. Just drop me a line. I'm keen to hear from you, or put a comment in the LinkedIn. But I'm keen to hear from you if you're interested in this. What I'm going to be doing is it's going to include OKRs training about the 4 rhythms of leadership, which I'll give you a preview of at the end of this. A weekly and quarterly calendar blueprint to run the 4 rhythms of leadership. Oh gosh, it's hard to say that. The 4 rhythms of leadership. A growing library of mechanisms. Now, this is something that I find really useful. Like I learned this at Amazon, basically, these mechanisms, and what they are is things that you can, like, think of it, a mechanism is like a gearbox, right? You have a gearbox is a mechanism, and it's like you have some input at one side, and as long as you put the right input in and you have the right mechanism in place, a particular output happens, right? Whether it's a gearbox or a machine, whatever it is, right? So I often think about these tools as mechanisms, and my planning process is a mechanism. It's a mechanism for saying, if you write the plan down like this and you review it with those people and get their engagement on the plan and have their input, then you will have a collaborative team working on the plan, and they'll own the plan as much as you will, and you'll be able to sort out a lot of the alignment issues. And it's not magic. You have to do the work, but using this mechanism causes a lot of those issues to be surfaced so that you can then resolve them. And so the mechanism tends to surface those solutions, right? And the other thing I'll be doing with this is a fortnightly live expert and peer coaching. Now, what I mean by that is every fortnight we'll have a Zoom call and I'll be on there. Whoever wants to can join. Um, and there'll be a combination of me coaching, like answering some Q&A and some coaching from me as someone who does this all the time and who can answer questions. But also what I found is that one of the most critical things for any leader is learning how to coach and making sure they're coaching their teams. So there'll be opportunity for peer coaching, coaching each other in this session as well. So other people who also know the mechanisms and how these work, coaching each other and teaching each other that. Number one, it helps you really understand it yourself. And number two, it gives you that skill of coaching. So that's what's going to involve. The mechanisms that I talked about, I've got a list of them that I'm putting together. Things like weekly KPI metric reviews, a stalemate buster for when you've got a problem that you can't resolve between two teams, working backwards, which is an innovation method developed at Amazon that's also known as the PRFAQ. It's all about coming up with new ideas that matter to customers. Performance reviews that work, how to do them. Business reviews that gain trust, things like that. So this is like business reviews is like, we need to get other managers or senior management to review what we're doing, and we need to gain their trust. So how do we present a review that gains trust? And a whole lot more. There's a bunch of things that I've got a draft on my whiteboard here of all of the things that I want to do. This will be developed progressively over the course of probably a year, I think. Early subscribers, anyone who's early on this course, will get to guide development, like help me figure out which ones are most useful for who, and provide feedback that I'll then use to iterate on this with. So if this is interesting to you, again, drop me an email. LinkedIn's over there. Tell me you're interested. We'll do this. What I need to make sure that this works is a certain number of people signing up for it, and then it's worth doing. And I'll put it together. But it's going to start in March 2023. At least that's the plan. We'll see how that goes because it depends on how much other work I have to do. Now, the investment for this, you get self-paced training, so a lot of it's video-based. There's templates and PDF guides for each of the mechanisms and OKRs and so on, and checklists and so on, and this fortnightly live expert and peer coaching. And depending on how many people I have, I may increase that to weekly or even by twice a week. Now, the plan is to have this at $199 a month, euros, and you can cancel whenever. Like, if you like it, stick with it for a month. If you don't like it, stop. It's okay. And we'll figure out how. So you can come back whenever you want. All that sort of stuff. But in the meantime, because I'm wanting to get people sort of interested in this in the short term, I'm offering it for $149 a month. If this is a financial problem for you, part of this is about understanding what pricing works for people and how many people I need to have to make this viable for me. But if you think you really want to do this, but gosh, that's too much, just let me know. But I think that for most people, this should be the right kind of price point. It should be expensible to most businesses. Most businesses will fund this kind of thing. And my goal with the price is that it's high enough that you need to have some commitment to actually engaging with this work, because there's no point in me just having this at a low price and then you signing up and then not doing the work, because that doesn't help anybody. What I want is for people to be, yes, I'm really keen to do this, and I'm willing to put it to actually invest in this. And hopefully, what I'm hoping is that as I grow my plan is that as I grow the library of mechanisms and other tools, and there's a whole lot of other plans that I have with this, but as I grow this remains valuable, and you want to stay for longer and longer. So I'd like it if this works for you and it creates value for you, and I'd love to hear your feedback as we're doing this. And if you drop me an email, please tell me what kinds of things you really want from this kind of course, because that'll help me sort of set it up as well. Finally, the 4 rhythms of leadership. This is the last slide that I got, and then open for Q&A. If anyone has any questions, we can drop the questions into the comments, and I'll answer them. And the 4 rhythms of leadership. This is what the structure of the Scale Up Leaders operating system is all about. It's really about every leader has to drive these 4 rhythms, and within if you're a CEO, you kind of have to set up the rhythms and make sure they happen, and it's your responsibility to make sure each of these rhythms is happening. If you're not the CEO, if you're or as an executive team, that's what you're responsible for. If you're a manager within an organization or a product manager, you still have to drive these rhythms. You have to understand how this works in the rest of your organization and make sure you're fitting into this in order to get things done. And I call them rhythms because it's really a weekly and daily and monthly and quarterly and annual cycle that you have to do. And the most important one is execution. Execution is all about getting stuff done. If you can't execute, then nothing else matters. That's why a chief executive officer is called an executive officer, because it's all about executing. Now, the execution cycle is really a weekly cycle and and a quarterly cycle. There's a whole series of things that go into this, but basically, it's like that regular cycle of weekly meetings and making sure that it links into the strategy. And that brings us to the strategy cycle because you don't want to be setting your strategy willy nilly, like every week. You don't want to change it every week, but you do need to have some discipline to make sure you're taking into account the things that are learned and that you're modifying your strategy and that you're developing a clear strategy. And the strategy to me involves some level of like consistent mission and a vision where you're going that might be consistent over a few years, and the strategy, or over 5 years, perhaps, say 10 years maybe, and the strategy, which is really the kind of thing that you would do update every 6 months or 2 years, thereabouts. But it's something that stays around for a while, and it's how you know where you're going. It's like your roadmap. So think about the execution as where the journey of the boat, like we have a boat going doing some exploration somewhere or going on a journey. Strategy is really the map on how we're getting from A to B and where are we turning and how do we navigate and all that sort of stuff. Now, the third cycle is the people cycle. Whoops. The third cycle is the people cycle. Now, I call it a people cycle because everyone understands people are important, and without great people, you're not going to get execution or strategy. But when you have great people, you can do great execution and great strategy. Um, but the people cycle is basically that cycle of making sure that I'm paying attention to my people. I'm having those one-on-ones. I'm having performance reviews. I'm using performance reviews usefully to drive performance and to help people develop. And I'm growing my team. And I understand the level to expect from people, and they understand the level to expect from people. And the only way to do this is with a rhythm. You can't just willy-nilly say, let's have a performance review. It has to be a cycle, and it has to link in with the strategy and the execution. And finally, funding. Funding is something that often enough as leaders in an organization we don't think about. We think it's something that happens with the CFO and the CEO and when they're doing the fundraising and so on, and that is super important. But in addition, if you're just a manager in a team or a product manager, funding is really about how much the company is investing in your team and your project, in your product, right? And how does this work? Part of this is about making sure that the things that you're doing are attaching to revenue and profit and loss, and you're making a profit from your product. And part of this is about making sure that your ability to execute your strategy and your people are worth investing in. Right now, I call it a cycle or a rhythm here because in most organizations this happens along a budgeting cycle, and there's some sort of like here's the opportunity to get more people or to get more investment. And so you have to sort of line up with that. But you need to be very conscious of when this happens and how it happens in order to make sure that you're able to grow the boat that's still going on the journey. If you think about this, the boat analogy, right? But all of these things link together, and you have to run all four of them as a leader. So the Scale Up Leaders Operating System, we'll cover these in a fair bit more detail and have a whole lot of tools helpful for this. That's the end of my webinar today. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat in anywhere. It's possible that this system is not showing me the questions, but I'll get to them later on. It's fine, and I'll get back to you. If you'd like to email me, I'll put my email address back on screen for a moment here with this one here. So richard@russellrussell.co, RICHARDRUSSELL.co. It's .co, not .com. And my LinkedIn is Richard A. Russell. You can find me on LinkedIn. You're probably connected to me on LinkedIn anyway, but feel free to drop me that message on LinkedIn, especially if you're interested in this or the other things that I do. And the other things that I do individual coaching and training. I do, and I work with executive teams of startups to implement OKRs and this whole management operating system, this whole leaders operating system. Is part of what I do. So if that's of interest to you, or if you know somebody who this would be of interest to, please do get in contact. Let me know. I'm happy to hear from you. In the meantime, have a great day. If there's no questions, I'll hang around for another 2 minutes just in case there are any questions. Natalia says, thank you so much. Very insightful. Thank you very much, Natalia. You can't see that, can you? But anyway, it's there. So thank you very much, Natalia. Appreciate your watching. I think there are other people watching as well, but I can't tell because this system doesn't tell me. Here we go. I have a question: how to convince stakeholders to adopt OKRs. Now, I wish I could make that white because it's not visible, is it? Let me put this on the screen like that. Can you see that now? I have a question: how to convince stakeholders to adopt OKRs. Okay, great question, Natalia. So how to convince stakeholders to adopt OKRs? It's really hard. If they don't have the interest and motivation in the first place, then it's often an uphill battle. So Number one, when I work with companies, I usually try to work with the top executive team, and when they're motivated and interested, then we can drive the change through the organization, and it works really well. When I work with individual managers and individual teams within an organization that's not already using OKRs, where the leaders and stakeholders are not committed to this, then we make sure that we have the scope here is just within that leader's scope, right? So the trick here is to focus on your own scope. Now, using OKRs is helpful. It's helpful for doing that because you're still able to get results and so on. What you miss out on is the clarity from your leadership and stakeholders on what they want to get done. And so it's harder to navigate, harder to put together OKRs that matter to them. However, using this OKR system, right, you then just use this system and you tell them, here's what I'm trying to achieve, here are my objectives, and here's how I'm defining success. Now I'm setting this expectation with them of this is what I'm trying to do. It's a great tool for managing your stakeholders, even if they're not interested in OKRs. They don't have to buy into OKRs. You just have to say, here's what I'm trying to do, and here's how I'm measuring success, right? Now, you will have pressure from various people to add more and more things on. There are tools in order to help you minimize that pressure, right? They'll be part of the Scale Up Leaders operating system as well. Basically a way of having the list of the things that are on my plate, and here's the line of the things that I can do and what I can't do. So if you want me to do something else, which other things should I drop? That's the fundamental question there, right? But that's the basic thing is you can do it. You don't need to convince them to adopt it. What usually happens in these situations is if you're able to deliver results that matter, and by having the discipline on getting your team engaged in the results that in the objectives and the key results, and using this execution cycle, you tend to deliver the results reasonably well. And because you're able to communicate explicitly about what you're trying to achieve and how you're measuring success, then people are usually reasonably interested in this, reasonably keen on it. There is one big caution here, the big danger sign, right? A lot of talk about OKRs is about having ambitious OKRs. You notice that on my slides, I have this OKRs FAST logo. FAST stands for frequently discussed, agile and ambitious, specific and time bound. This is a good way of having good goals. Having good goals, and OKRs really fit that category. But ambitious is the thing here. Stretch goals. People talk about having an OKR that you have it so ambitious that you're hitting 70% is success, right? When your stakeholders have not bought into that concept, it doesn't matter whether they understand OKRs or not, but if they have not bought into that particular stretch concept, then you have to be very, very careful about what you communicate, what level of ambition you communicate outside. You might have internally to your team an ambitious goal, but to your stakeholders, be really careful, because if you say we're aiming to get conversion rate from 1.2 to 1.8, and you think that's a real stretch goal, we're probably going to hit 1.6, maybe 1.7, right? They're going to hear 1.8 and then think that that's your commitment, right? It's really hard for people to get over that. So sometimes you have to have two messages, one internally and one externally, right? One for your teams to make sure that you've got an ambitious goal that makes sense, and one for externals to say, this is what we're committing to. The difference between committed and ambitious stretch goals. There's another question here from Natalia. If I don't have data yet, I wish this would. I need to edit this to make it so it's visible. Oh gosh. So can I change the color here? Background. Effect shadow. Now I can't change the color here very easily. I have to learn how to use this tool so I can change the color. Here we go. Maybe I have to do that. White. Save. Let's put that on there. Here we go. If I don't have data yet to challenge the team to move from a point A to B, how can I rate a key result correctly? I presume you're talking about here on about when you don't have a baseline, like a baseline from X to Y. I presume that's what you're talking about here, Natalia. So I don't have data yet to challenge a team to move from point A to point B. How can I write a key result correctly? Don't worry too much about writing it correctly, right? Because the thing is that over the quarter, you're, as a leader, engaged with the team on doing the right things. And so we're going through this weekly cycle. I had the weekly review, right? The weekly check-in. So you're doing this weekly check-in here. And we've got this review progress plans and problems, are we on track and so on. Now, one of the things that tends to come up here is if the OKR is written badly, well, then maybe we rewrite it. Now, there's a cost in changing it, but there's no need to sort of be fixated on exactly what we wrote before. We should never change that. We should be open to changing things if it makes sense. Now, the thing is, there is a cost in changing it, so you shouldn't change it too often. Like once a quarter is probably enough, and especially, so be minimal, but it's okay to change it. So don't be too fearful about writing that key result absolutely correctly. It's not necessary to get it correct. But if you want to get to the idea of how to do this, the real thing here is to think about, what are you really trying to achieve, right? How do I define a problem that matters for this team that's going to be defining what I want to achieve? And sometimes you have an A to start from, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you say, I'm going to start measuring this. Sometimes I say, we're going to start measuring it and aim to hit B, right? Sometimes we say, we're going to go from whatever it is to B, or from, we're going to have X there, and we're going to first of all measure it and then put what the X is, and then have X plus 20%, right? Whatever we think is the right thing to do, that's the kind of thing to do here. Now, I think that's what you're getting at. So I hope that answers your question. Martin, I'm going to jump to Martin's question here. Hi, Richard. Do you have any tips on formulating a great objective? We usually have an agreement on key results, but people have different ideas and preferences regarding the wording of the objective. So yes, let me just get rid of this. There we go. So I need to change the timer of this as well. It disappears too quickly. So basically, do I have ideas and preferences regarding people have ideas and preferences regarding the wording of the objective. My view, I tend to use this simple method of like, we will, and now I've got some other training somewhere that has the format that I like to use. So I have that in my other training. But basically, the real thing here is to envision the destination you're trying to achieve. The usual debate is actually when people want to use a key result as an objective, and they want to have like a number in there and a metric and a really specific statement, or they have consultantitis. And consultantitis is when it looks like something that Accenture would write. I hope no one from Accenture is watching. I'm not picking on you in particular, but it looks like something that a consultant would write, and it has like, we're going to optimize the synergies of strategies and all this sort of complex wording, and we're trying to cover everything in this big complex thing. My advice is to simplify as much as possible. Try and get it so that it's, use in jokes, use cultural references, use swear words if that's your culture, right? Use something that matters for your culture, because what you want is for this to be easily coming up in that meeting where someone says, we're trying to solve a problem, we're working on something, and someone says, hey, what are we really trying to do here? And someone needs to be able to say, we're trying to build a kick-ass sales engine, right? That's the thing. It needs to come up easily in that conversation. So it doesn't need to be specific. It doesn't need to be really unambiguous. It just needs to be sticky, right? And inspiring. So try and have the destination in a way that sort of like is meaningful for the destination, and then define it with the key results. Like you're getting the definition with the key results. The objective is really a hook to hang everything on, a hook to put into your conversations, a headline for things. Think of it like that. Think about it in terms of like when you have the motivational speech, when Simon Sinek speaks or whatever, whoever your favorite motivational speaker is, they usually have 3 points. And this is the point, 1, 2, and 3. And those points are catchphrases, or they're sound bites. So focus on that kind of thing and try and have it as an inspiring destination. Now, one thing is the objective doesn't have to be fair, the key results don't have to, but especially the objective does not have to be confined by a quarter. You might be trying to build a kick-ass sales engine, and this quarter it's defined by this, and then the following quarter we're still trying to build a kick-ass sales engine, and it's defined by these key results because we've moved on, right? You don't have to have one that is completed this quarter by everything. You're completing whatever you're trying to do as measured by the key results, right? So you can roll over objectives, it's fine. In fact, you can roll over key results and change the numbers, or even not change the numbers, but usually that's a little bit more painful because it means you haven't achieved the thing you said you wanted to achieve. And Natalia has another question. How to engage a team that is afraid to fail reaching the OKRs and does not commit properly? So I think it depends on what your role with this team is, I suspect. So let's assume that you're a leader of the team, you're the manager of the team. How do you engage it? Disappeared off the screen again. How do you engage the team that's afraid to fail reaching the OKRs and does not commit properly? This is really about creating psychological safety in some sense. Now, I'm not a fan of the word psychological safety. I think it sounds a bit wishy-washy somehow, but it's actually a very meaningful term for most people. So maybe it's just me, but it's really about making sure that people feel safe to fail. And some of this is about helping them understand what the consequences of failure are, as in, and part of this is if the consequences of failure are meaningful, like if you're going to get fired for failing or miss the promotion or whatever, then you've got a problem to solve with your organization. And their response about being afraid to fail and not committing is a reasonable response to this, right? You have to create an environment where people can do things and can try their best and fail and still succeed in doing their work, because that's actually good work. Think about this in terms of like, I did a cycle tour with a team, with a charity cycle ride from London to Paris. No, Paris to London. It's 20 kilometers over 3 days with a group of 70 people about 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, just before pandemic, year before, in 2019. And when I do, it wasn't not competitive, but my goal when I first went on there was to think, okay, I just want to not be last. I don't want to be the slowest person there, and I want to be able to finish it and still be able to walk. And I don't mind if I have to push the bike some parts or anything like that. I don't want to have to get a lift. I want to not be last, and I want to be able to walk at the end. After the first day, I realized, oh, actually, I'm not as bad as I thought I was. So I'm doing okay here. I can stay in the middle of the pack. So then my goal became, I want to go the whole way without walking the bike. And I want to be able to stay in the middle of the pack. There were sort of like 3 packs, and I want to stay with the middle pack and mostly stick with them. And, I was mostly able to do that until the last day, where there was this giant hill for about 3 kilometers, and everybody, except for the pros, was walking up it. So I had to get off and walk. So I failed my reset objective. But the purpose of this is really about, to get the purpose of this is really about to get performance and to generate the best performance and generate the engagement so that people are doing their best. And so for me, this was actually a good result. And so clearly this is not a place where I'm going to get fired because it's a charity bike ride, but the concept is similar. I want to see in my team people setting goals that are going to generate the best performance. And in order to do that, they have to be not afraid to fail. In order for that to happen, there has to be no consequences for failure, right? We have to reward the effort given the context of everything here. And this means that managers need to be fully engaged in the work of their teams. This is part of the Scale Up Leaders operating system, right? But I mean, you have to be fully engaged in the work of your teams. Like, how do I know what's happening here so that I really understand the constraints, really understand the barriers that people had, really understand whether missing the goal was actually good work, right? Maybe it was great work. Maybe I should reward them for not having hit the goal. Maybe the fact that they met the goal means that they were being unambitious. So it really does depend on quite a lot around the organization to do this. But practically speaking, if the team really is afraid to fail, we have to work with where they are. And if they're there and they're afraid, and we have a system in place that's going to punish them for failure, we need to set relatively low ambition OKRs with them, things that they feel comfortable with, and commit to them. And then sometimes that involves doing more of the planning work to create the confidence. So you do some more planning to create confidence, and then work with that and slowly sort of iterate the culture and change the culture to be more ambitious. But you can only do that when people see in practice that failure is not punished. Alessandro asks, Richard, have you thought for your leadership rhythm to carve out a customer cycle on its own? So, no, I haven't, and I haven't thought of this, and I don't think it's the right thing to do, because I think that I don't think there's a customer cycle that I need to link into. Leaders don't necessarily need to drive the customer cycle. The customer cycle exists, and all of those things that are happening, execution, strategy, people, and funding, all of them are really closely associated with the customer. So to me, the customer is at the core of all of this. It's not a separate customer cycle. So I think of the cycle as being, of a cycle as being something that I do repeatedly, like sort of a pattern or a blueprint, or here's the weekly pattern, here's the quarterly pattern, here's the yearly pattern, here's the thing that I need to do over every 3 to 5 years. And things that to make sure I'm doing on a particular timeline to make sure they happen. And I need to link these in with the business needs, right? The way the business works, right? So, so there's certainly in the first part of the leadership, the Scale Up Leaders operating system, we'll be talking about how to set up the calendar, how to understand the calendar, right? But with customers, it depends on the business so much, because customers are really different. And so for example, my business is structured it's mostly OKRs. Like, that's where people buy my services to help with OKRs in their organization. And in practice, a lot of what I do is leadership coaching and teaching how to manage, right? And how to do strategy and all that sort of stuff. And I help people solve all those problems. But it's all about OKRs. So I structure my business around the quarterly cycle, because that's how my customers think. In most businesses, quarterly cycles are really important, but it depends on the business. And sometimes customers are, the sales cycle is minutes or days. Sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's months, sometimes it's years. And sometimes the life cycle of how long you're working with a customer is longer or shorter. For me, my usual customer is 5 or 6 months. For some things that you do, it might be just half an hour. right? I mean, I have some customers that I work with just for an hour um, on a workshop or a coaching, a one-off coaching engagement. So it really depends. But I don't necessarily think you need to drive a customer cycle. I think you need to do that as part of your business, but in terms of leadership, in terms of management, how you're operating, I think it's a different topic. But it's a really interesting idea. I'll have a think about it. But I do think that that's part of everything else as opposed to being a separate thing. Excellent. Well, like, thanks very much for your engagement. Thanks for the questions. I really appreciate it. It's wonderful to feel to hear the questions and interest. If you're, I'll finish up by just putting it back this slide about the Scale Up Leaders operating system on the screen here, so you know what to do. The Scale Up Leaders operating system. I'm starting it in March 2023 is the plan. We'll see how the timing goes with a few other things, but that's my plan. If you're interested, drop me an email, connect to me on LinkedIn, send me a message on LinkedIn. We'll be talking about OKRs, the rhythms of leadership, the weekly and quarterly calendar blueprint. There'll be a growing library of mechanisms that I have already sort of planned out, but I'm going to put more of them in there, and live expert and peer coaching. You get the opportunity to coach as well as hearing from me. So it's not just my voice. And all these mechanisms, we're putting all these mechanisms in there. They're sort of all self-service. So you can pull metrics, you can pull out of this, you can pull the templates and PDF guides, checklists for each one of them. It's all self-paced training. So when you have a situation where you're like, I have a stalemate, you can go and find the stalemate buster, right? Things like that. And of course, this fortnightly live coaching. Normally, I'm planning to put it at $199 a month. If you're interested in signing up early, I'll do it for $149 a month. I'm keen to hear from you if you're interested and you think this is something you're happy to do. There's no long-term commitment for this. I just want to make sure that it's something worth selling. Do people want to buy this? Does it work for you? And if it does, then I can justify investing in setting this program up and starting it, and then I can iterate from there. I mean, I'm building my business as I go here, but this is something that I know is of value to many of my customers. As in, a lot of the work that I do with my customers involves doing all this stuff, and what I'm doing is packaging it into a product. So look, thanks very much for listening. Really appreciate your time. Love to hear from you on any topic that's related to this. Just drop me a line. Okay. Thanks very much. Bye-bye. By the way, there will be a replay of this on LinkedIn and on YouTube. So feel free to share it around or go back and look at the start of it or whatever you want. Skip through it or whatever you like to do. I'll probably take out some portions of this as clips as well. But have a look on my YouTube channel or on my LinkedIn. You should find this as a replay is the word I'm looking for. All right. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.